Texas Republicans will need a runoff to decide the nominee for Attorney General after incumbent Ken Paxton failed to garner enough Republican support in the primary, setting up a face-off with Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush in May. Here to talk about this is former Texas GOP Chairman James Dickey and Ed Espinoza from Progress, Texas. Ed, will voters who picked Ava Guzman or Louis Gohmert switch their vote to George P. in the general election?
It's kind of, you mean in the runoff election? I think that's kind of the big question here, right? Are those who have been dissatisfied with Paxton willing to go back to Paxton, or do they want an anti-establishment person? The problem here is that your anti-establishment person is named Bush, which is the pinnacle of establishment politics. So it's really an interesting situation to be in. I don't know where they go. I know that Louis Gohmert initially on election night said he would endorse whoever came in second. He has walked back that statement since then. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think there'll be lots of twists and turns in this runoff series.
You know, James, Gohmert has said that Paxton's going to be indicted in March for corruption. Do impending legal issues matter to GOP voters?
Well, it really depends on whether those legal issues, whether the voters believe that those legal issues reflect a problem that they don't want in office, or whether it's purely a political hit piece, as it was in the case of the old lingering effort that Paxton's had to deal with. The voters clearly decided that that was not a thing they had a problem with. This may or may not be different, and it's really up to both the Paxton campaign and the George P. campaign to make their case to the voters of why each of them should be chosen.
Ed, if Paxton is indeed indicted, how does that change the metrics of this runoff?
It's tough to say. Remember, he's been indicted once before already, but he also has additional charges where his staff walked out on him and accused him of corruption as recently as sometime in the past year or two. The bigger issue here is that 40% of Republicans stood with the Attorney General. That means about 60% went against him, including in his home county of Denton County. So he has got to make this issue about Bush. He's got to make this runoff about Bush, because Bush is going to make it about Paxton. And if it's only about Paxton and his malfeasances, that's not good news for him. An incumbent in a runoff is an incumbent in trouble. And that's what we're seeing with Paxton right now. Can Bush capitalize on it? That remains to be seen. If he doesn't, the Democrats certainly will. Well,
talking about Bush, James, Bush said in a speech last night that nominating Paxton would cost Republicans the office in the fall. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's clearly the case he needs to make, that voters, Republican voters, should replace Paxton now so that we don't have the risk that the general election voters replace him in November. And the problem is there are a lot of unknowns, and we can't put anything past the Biden administration. Whether or not there were baseless charges, it is completely reasonable to assume that they would go after him, just like we saw here in Travis County, where the Travis County DA that just loves to let criminals go free actually has recently indicted a bunch of policemen, including a police officer who's running for a Republican seat here in Travis County.
Okay, well, as far as the Attorney General question goes, on the Republican side, it's still open until May. We got to wrap it up. Ed, James, thank you both very much.